Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
Welcome back to my channel. Before we begin, let me know where you're tuning in from down in the comments. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next tale. The only light in my home office came from the 4K monitor, a sterile blue-white glow that painted the walls in shades of ghost. It was just after 2 a.m. outside. The November rain that had been threatening all day was finally lashing against the windows of our Brooklyn brownstone, a rhythmic, angry sound. The live stream was supposed to be a surprise, a romantic gesture. Cynthia was in Prague for a music festival with her friends, a last hurrah before our wedding, just 90 days away. Her favorite band, the Newberry Five, was headlining. When I saw the festival offered a pay-per-view stream, I thought it would be perfect. I'd record it, we'd watch it together when she got back, and they'd get to see her face light up. The thought seemed so stupid now, so naive. The music was a thumping, generic beat that vibrated through the expensive speakers I'd installed myself. I was sipping a glass of bourbon, the good stuff, the 12-year-old single malt we were saving for special occasions. Tonight felt special. I was watching my future wife have the time of her life, an ocean away. I leaned forward, trying to pick her out of the massive, writhing crowd. Then the camera panned to the stage, and the world stopped. It wasn't a slow realization. It was an instant, brutal impact like a sledgehammer to the chest. There she was, my Cynthia, center stage, flanked by her best friend Brooke, and they were topless. My breath hitched in my throat. The bourbon glass slipped from my numb fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. But the sound was distant. A dull pop in another universe. All I could see was the screen. Her long, blonde hair, the hair I loved to run my fingers through, was wild, whipping around as she danced with a frenetic, almost desperate energy. Her smile was wide, manic, a stranger's smile. This wasn't the woman I was going to marry. This was someone else. A flash of memory, sharp and painful, cut through the shock. Us, last summer, on a blanket under the stars in Montauk, sliding the diamond ring onto her finger, the cool metal against her skin, her gasp, a perfect little O, before she throws her arms around my neck. "Yes, Logan," she'd whispered, her voice thick with emotion. 1,000 times, yes. On the screen, she pressed her bare chest against the sweaty back of the lead guitarist. He didn't even turn around, just kept playing, a smug look on his face. The crowd roared. She wasn't some random fan who'd rushed the stage. There was no security trying to pull her off. This was planned. This was part of the show. Brooke was doing the same with the bassist, her movements even more brazen. Another memory, a hot knife in my gut. Cynthia, 2 weeks ago, curled up on the sofa with me, blueprints for our future home spread across the coffee table. She's tracing the lines for the nursery with her fingertip. "Right here, Logan," she'd said, her voice soft as velvet. "This is where we'll put the crib. I can already see it." Her eyes, a brilliant, honest blue, had met mine. I can see our whole life. I watched, frozen, as the guitarist she was grinding on finally turned. His hands, covered in silver rings, found her waist, then slid up her sides. I saw her hands snake around his torso, her fingers digging into his jeans just above the belt line. She leaned in, licking a path up his neck as he laughed, a predator toying with its prey. The song ended. The band took a bow. But Cynthia and Brooke didn't leave. They stayed, jumping and screaming like groupies who'd won the lottery. As the band walked off stage, the two guitarists each grabbed one of Cynthia's ass cheeks, hoisting her up slightly. She threw her head back and laughed, a wild, throaty sound I'd never heard before. She kissed one, then turned and kissed the other, a quick, hungry press of lips. They disappeared into the blackness of backstage, their arms wrapped around her, her hands still exploring places that were supposed to be mine. The stream cut to a commercial for a European cell phone provider. The house was plunged into silence, broken only by the drumming rain and the frantic, shallow sound of my own breathing. I stared at the dark screen, but the afterimage was burned onto my retinas. Her smile, his hands, her betrayal broadcast in high definition for the whole world to see. An architect builds things on solid foundations. It's the first rule. You check the soil, you test the ground, you make sure what you're building on is stable, that it can bear the weight of what's to come. My foundation, the very bedrock of the life I was building, had just turned to quicksand. And I was already neck-deep. I didn't move. I just sat there in the dark, with the smell of spilled bourbon and shattered glass filling the air, and a high-pitched ringing in my ears that sounded like the end of everything. The night bled into a gray, merciless dawn. I don't think I slept. I think I just sat in my chair, replaying the video in my head, each loop more torturous than the last. The sun, weak and watery, finally filtered through the rain-streaked windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the shards of glass on the floor. The house felt huge, hollow. Every corner held a memory of her, and now every memory was a ghost with sharp teeth. I moved like an automaton, a machine given a single grim task. I went to our bedroom, my bedroom. I corrected myself and pulled her designer suitcases from the top of the closet. They were still empty, waiting for her return. I started with her drawers, silk and lace lingerie, pastel colors, things I'd bought for her, things we'd shared. I dumped them into a suitcase without folding. Then I found it. Tucked away in the back of her bottom drawer, under a pile of winter sweaters, was a separate stash. Lingerie I'd never seen before. Black leather, intricate straps, fabrics that were anything but comfortable. Things designed not for seduction, but for a statement. They weren't new. I could see the faint creases, the slight wear. They'd been worn, just not for me. The foundation analogy came back to me. It was like finding out the concrete you'd poured was mixed with ash. It looked solid, but it was rotten from the inside out. A cold, methodical rage, a kind of rage I hadn't felt since I was a kid fighting for scraps, took over. I went to my office, grabbed the heavy-duty shears I used for cutting architectural models, and walked back to the bedroom. One by one, I took the unfamiliar pieces of lingerie and the slinky, low-cut dresses I didn't recognize, and I cut them to ribbons. The snip, snip, snip of the steel blades was the only sound in the house, a therapeutic, destructive rhythm. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. I packed the shredded remains with the rest of her things, her books, her shoes, the little trinkets she'd placed around our home. Each item was a lie. The whole time, my phone sat on the kitchen counter, silent. I expected a call, a text, an explanation, a lie, anything. But there was nothing. She was still in her bubble, an ocean away, probably sleeping off a hangover in some rock star's hotel room. Just as I zipped the last suitcase shut, the phone finally rang. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild bird in a cage. I looked at the caller ID. Not Cynthia, her mother. I let it ring 3 times before answering, taking a deep breath to steady my voice. Hello? Logan, finally? Her voice was sharp, brittle, already annoyed. Where have you been? I've been calling. I've been busy, I said. My voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. Well, you better get a move on. Our tasting at the Carlisle is in an hour. You can't be late for this. The chef is a very important man. The sheer, staggering cluelessness of it almost made me laugh. It was like someone complaining about the catering on the Titanic as it was sinking. She was worried about canapes while my entire world was underwater. I won't be making it, I said. A pause. What do you mean you won't be making it? Logan? This is for your wedding. She said the words like she was scolding a child. I looked at the packed suitcases lined up by the front door like coffins. There is no wedding, Catherine. The silence on the other end was heavy, thick with disbelief and indignation. What? What did you just say? Don't be ridiculous. It's over, I said, and the words, spoken aloud for the first time, felt both like a death sentence and a liberation. The wedding is off. As for Cynthia, I let a bead of silence hang in the air, a little drop of poison. You should call her. It sounds like she's busy, expanding her social circle in Prague. I hung up before she could respond, before the inevitable screech of outrage could travel through the phone. I dropped the phone on the counter, and the clatter was unnaturally loud in the silent house. The roar wasn't in my voice. It was inside me, a silent, screaming tempest, tearing everything apart. The next evening, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite chime. It was a hard, insistent jab, the kind that says, "We know you're in there." I knew who it was. I'd spent the day in a fog, canceling vendors, my voice a monotone drone as I broke contract after contract. Each call was a nail in the coffin of the life I was supposed to have. I opened the door to find Zachary and Catherine Lewis standing on my stoop. Zachary, Cynthia's father, was a man who looked like he was carved from expensive mahogany. Tall, impeccably dressed in a cashmere coat that probably cost more than my first car, his face was a mask of controlled fury. He'd always looked down on me, the scholarship kid who'd clawed his way up. He tolerated me because his daughter loved me, and more recently, because my architecture firm was starting to land major contracts. I was becoming a good investment. "What the hell is this, Logan?" he snarled, pushing past me into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. Catherine followed, her lips a thin, disapproving line, her eyes scanning my home as if looking for evidence of my unworthiness. "It's exactly what I told your wife," I said, closing the door. I felt strangely calm, the eye of my own personal hurricane. "It's over." "Over?" Zachary's voice was low, dangerous. He took a step closer. He was used to getting his way, to intimidating people into submission. "We have over $100,000 in non-refundable deposits. You don't just call off a wedding of this magnitude because of some lover's spat." "This wasn't a spat, Zachary." "Then what was it?" Catherine chimed in, her voice dripping with condescension. "Did little Cynthia do something to upset you? Did she forget to fluff your pillow?" The rage I'd been suppressing began to simmer. I looked from his arrogant face to her mocking one. They didn't get it. They didn't want to get it. They saw this as a breach of contract, a social inconvenience. I didn't say a word. I just walked over to the 75-inch television that dominated the living room wall, the one Cynthia had insisted we buy for movie nights. I picked up the remote, my hand steady. With a few clicks, I navigated to the recorded video file. I hit play. The bright, flashing lights of the concert filled the room. The roar of the crowd echoed off my minimalist walls. Zachary and Catherine stood there, confused. Then the camera found the stage. It found their daughter. Catherine let out a small, strangled gasp. Her hand flew to her mouth, her perfectly manicured nails pressing into her cheek. Zachary's face went from angry to slack-jawed disbelief. He stared, his jaw working silently, as he watched his pride and joy, his perfect daughter, press her naked body against a sweaty musician. He saw her hands slide down his back. He saw the kiss. I let the entire 5-minute segment play out in agonizing detail. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum where all the air had been sucked out by the images on the screen. When it was over, and the scene cut back to the festival logo, I turned off the television. I turned to face them. Catherine was pale, looking at her husband as if for a script. Zachary's face was the color of old brick. The disbelief was gone, and something else had replaced it. I had seen that look before, in boardrooms, on the faces of men trying to figure out how to spin a disaster. It was calculation. He cleared his throat, his composure returning with a visible effort. "It's a misunderstanding, a youthful mistake. She was drunk, obviously." He was talking to himself more than to me. "She's having her last fling before settling down," Catherine added, nodding vigorously, her eyes pleading with me to accept the flimsy excuse. But Zachary wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the blank screen, his mind churning. Finally, his eyes met mine, and they were cold, hard. "Well, find a way to manage this," he said. It wasn't an apology. It was a statement of intent, a business problem to be solved. I knew in that moment what he was thinking. He wasn't thinking about his daughter's honor or my pain. He was thinking about the merger his company was navigating. He was thinking about the society pages. And he was thinking about the Hayes Tower, the 50-story skyscraper my firm was about to break ground on, a project that was putting my name on the map. He wasn't about to let his daughter's indiscretion sever his connection to that. "There's nothing to manage," I said, my voice like ice. "Now get out of my house." 2 days. 2 days of silence from her. I imagined her phone had died, or she'd lost it, or she'd thrown it into a river in a fit of drug-fueled ecstasy. ID spent the time methodically dismantling our life. Edie already dropped off her suitcases, neatly stacked in front of her parents' garage, a final, petty act of defiance. My lawyer was on notice. My bank accounts were secured. I was building a fortress, brick by painful brick. Then, on the third day, my phone buzzed. Her name flashed on the screen. Cynthia. For a second, I just stared at it. A part of me, a stupid, hopeful part I thought I'd killed, wanted to believe this was the call where it all made sense. A call full of tears and regret, and a story so convincing it could patch the hole in my universe. I was an idiot. I answered. What? It wasn't a question. It was a demand. Logan? Oh, thank God, honey, I'm so sorry. Her voice was syrupy sweet, laced with a practiced, breathy concern. My phone just died, and the converters here are a nightmare. I've been trying to call you. The lie was so effortless, so smooth, it was almost impressive. She was an artist. Is that so? I said, walking over to the window and looking out at the gray Brooklyn street. Yes, I missed you so much. How was the tasting with Mom? Did you guys behave? She asked, a playful lilt in her voice. She didn't know. Her parents hadn't told her, or more likely they'd told her to play dumb, to pretend nothing had happened and smooth it all over. It was a coordinated strategy. I decided to play along. The game felt sick, but I wanted to see how far she would take it. It was fine. So, how was the concert? Have fun? Oh my God, Logan, it was incredible. We had an absolute ball. The energy was insane. You would have loved it. We had a ball. The choice of words felt deliberate, a taunt I couldn't prove. In the background, I could hear a faint giggle. It sounded like Brooke. They were together. They were mocking me. The calm I'd been cultivating shattered, replaced by a white-hot, razor-sharp fury. My hand tightened on the phone. That's great, I said, my voice dangerously even. That's really great to hear. Actually, I recorded the pay-per-view for you. As a surprise. The silence on her end was instantaneous. The giggling stopped. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, the frantic search for a new lie. Oh, she finally said, her voice a few octaves higher. Honey, you didn't have to do that. Why don't you? Why don't you just save it? We can watch it together when I get home. It'll be more fun that way, right? Her tone was pleading, desperate. This was my moment, the checkmate. I could feel the cruelty coiling in my gut, and I welcomed it. Yeah, maybe, I said, letting a long pause stretch between us. I let her hang there, dangling on the hook of her own deception. Then, just before I ended the call, I delivered the final blow, my voice dropping to a conversational whisper. Hey, before you go, can you do me a favor? Ask Brooke something for me. I couldn't quite tell from the video, but that mark on her right breast. Is that a birthmark or a tattoo? I didn't wait for an answer. I pressed the red icon on my screen, severing the connection. I imagined her face, the blood draining from it, the panic in her eyes as she turned to Brooke. The game was over. The war had just begun. The days following that final phone call were a study in brutal efficiency. Grief is a fog, but rage, pure, undiluted rage, is a crystal lens. It brings everything into sharp, perfect focus. My life with Cynthia was a failed project, a structure built on a lie, and it was time for demolition. My first call was to my lawyer, Mark. He's a shark in a tailored suit, the kind of guy you hire when you want to leave nothing but rubble behind. Mark, it's Logan Hayes. I was in my office, staring at the scale model of the Hayes Tower. It was a monument of glass and steel, a testament to order and precision. My future. The wedding is off. I need you to go over the prenup, but that's secondary. I want a scorched earth policy on everything else. Logan? What happened? His voice held genuine surprise. The foundation was faulty. Just handle it. I hung up and turned to my computer. Online banking. The joint savings account we'd been building for our future home, I transferred my half, exactly 50.00 comma, into a new private account. I left her share sitting there, a digital monument to her half of the lie. I changed every password, every security question. Mother's maiden name? Not anymore. Name of first pet? Gone. I systematically erased every digital thread that connected us. At my firm, Hayes Architecture, the energy is usually one of controlled chaos phones ringing, young architects debating angles, the hum of 3D printers. I walked through the open plan office, my face a stone mask. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Maria, looked up with concern. Mr. Hayes, are you all right? Maria, I need you to do something for me quietly. Contact building security. A woman named Cynthia Lewis is no longer permitted access to this floor. She is not to be announced. She is not to be let up. No exceptions. Is that clear? Yes, sir, she said, her eyes wide. But she didn't ask any questions. That's why I hired her. I spent the rest of the day in meetings, my mind a fortress. We were finalizing the load-bearing specifications for the tower's core. I spoke of tensile strength and wind shear calculations, my voice steady, my focus absolute. Inside, a demolition crew was taking a wrecking ball to my heart, but on the outside I was just an architect, building. It was the only way I knew how to survive. You don't fix a compromised structure. You tear it down, clear the debris, and build something stronger in its place. That evening I got a call from my best friend Sean, as a graphic designer with an office in Soho, a cynical, funny guy who had known me since my scholarship days at Columbia. Dude, I got a text from my cousin who works in music journalism, he said, his voice grim. Some video from a festival in Prague is making the rounds in certain circles. He asked if that was your Cynthia. A pause. Logan, talk to me. There's nothing to talk about, I said, my voice rough. I saw it live. Jesus, he breathed. I'm so sorry, man. What are you gonna do? I'm razing it to the ground, Sean, I said, looking around my silent, empty brownstone. I'm starting over. She must have caught the first flight back. The rational part of me knew it was because her web of lies had been exposed. The part of me that still felt the phantom sting of love wondered if it was because she actually thought she could fix it. I was leaving Sean's office a few days later. Wed grabbed a beer after work, and he'd spent an hour trying to get me to talk, to yell, to do anything other than operate with the cold precision of a surgeon. It wasn't working. As I walked toward my car parked on a cobblestone street in Soho, a figure darted out from between two parked cars. It was her, Cynthia. She looked like a ghost of herself. Her usually perfect blonde hair was a tangled mess, thrown into a hasty ponytail. She wore wrinkled jeans and a gray hoodie, my hoodie. Dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes, which were redrimmed and frantic. "Logan!" she cried, her voice cracking. She rushed forward and grabbed my arm. Her touch felt like a jolt of electricity, wrong and invasive. I flinched away instinctively. "Don't touch me," I said. The words came out colder than I intended. "Please, just talk to me. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Her eyes were wild, darting around as if she expected to be attacked. What I said on the phone, it wasn't true. It was a mistake, a stupid, drunken mistake. A mistake? I repeated the word, tasting its inadequacy. A mistake is turning the wrong way down a one-way street, Cynthia. A mistake is forgetting to pay a parking ticket. What you did, that was a choice. A series of them, broadcast for the world to see. "I love you," she sobbed, the words tumbling out. "You have to believe me. I love you." Hearing those words from her lips now was like hearing nails on a chalkboard. They were meaningless, a currency she had devalued until it was worth nothing. "Your love is cheap, Cynthia," I said, my voice low and shaking with a rage I could no longer contain. "It's worthless. You put it on a clearance rack in Prague for anyone to take, so don't you dare stand here and try to sell it to me." I turned to walk away, but she lunged, grabbing the sleeve of my jacket. "No, Logan, please! Don't do this." Just then, the door to Sean's building opened and he stepped out, his phone to his ear. He saw the scene, the desperate woman clinging to my arm, the thunderous look on my face. He hung up immediately. "Hey, everything okay here?" he asked, his eyes fixed on Cynthia, his posture shifting into something protective. I shook her hand off my arm like it was something foul. "Yeah," I said, not looking at her. "Everything's fine." I walked past him toward my car. "Just taking out the trash." I didn't look back. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving her standing on a cobblestone street in the middle of Soho, a piece of wreckage I was leaving behind in my scorched earth retreat. The rain came back that weekend, a miserable, persistent drizzle that turned the city into a watercolor of blurred headlights and gray concrete. I was holed up in my brownstone, trying to lose myself in the complex schematics for the tower's HVAC system. It was useless. Every line I drew seemed to twist into the shape of her on that stage. Around 10 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. Not the hard, demanding knock of her parents, but a soft, hesitant tapping. I knew it was her. My first instinct was to ignore it. Let her stand in the rain. Let her feel a fraction of the cold that had settled into my bones. But a darker, more pragmatic thought took hold. I hadn't gotten the truth, not the whole truth, and I realized I couldn't start rebuilding until I knew the full extent of the rot. I needed to see the compromised foundation with my own eyes before I could bulldoze it. I opened the door. She stood there, drenched. Rainwater dripped from the ends of her matted hair and ran in rivulets down her face, mingling with tears. She was shivering, hugging herself in that gray hoodie of mine. She looked small, pathetic. A part of me almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "What do you want, Cynthia?" I asked, my voice flat. I didn't move from the doorway. My dad kicked me out," she stammered, her teeth chattering. "He told me to fix this mess or not come back. Logan, please. I have nowhere to go." I stared at her for a long moment. "You want to come in? You tell me the truth, the real truth, not the garbage you tried to sell me on the street." She nodded frantically, like a drowning person being thrown a line. "Anything. He'll tell you anything." I stepped back and let her in. She dripped onto the welcome mat, a puddle forming around her feet. I didn't offer her a towel. I just gestured toward the living room couch. "Sit," I said. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter, watching her. She sat on the edge of the expensive leather sofa, looking utterly out of place. "It was Brooke," she began, her voice a hoarse whisper. She got some stuff from one of the roadies. We were just partying, having fun, and then things got out of control. I don't remember all of it clearly. It's all a blur." "A blur," I repeated, my voice devoid of inflection. I walked into the living room and stood in front of her, looking down. "So in this blur, you just happened to find yourself on stage, half naked, with your hands all over a man you'd never met." "I was drugged, Logan," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "I wouldn't have done that otherwise. You know I wouldn't." "I don't know anything anymore, Cynthia," I said calmly. "I know what I saw. I saw you laughing. I saw you enjoying it. That didn't look like a blur. That looked like a choice." She started crying again, deep, ugly sobs. "It wasn't, I swear. It wasn't my fault." I listened to the desperate claims, the frantic denials. She was building a narrative, a new structure of lies on top of the old one. It was a flimsy defense, full of holes I could see right through. But I let her talk. I let her spin her story of being a victim, a passenger in her own bad decisions. Because I knew the real truth was still buried underneath, and I was going to keep digging until I hit it. I let her cry for a minute, the sound echoing in the sterile quiet of the room. I felt nothing. The emotional part of my brain had been cauterized. I was an investigator now, examining a catastrophic failure. "So you were drugged," I said, cutting through her sobs. "And you have no memory of how you got on stage?" She shook her head, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of my hoodie. "It's foggy. Brooke was just pushing us, telling us to live a little." "Live a little," I repeated. I walked over to the bar cart and poured myself a bourbon. I didn't offer her one. "Tell me about the other trips, Cynthia. The girls' trips to Cabo, to Miami. Did you live a little on those trips too?" Her head snapped up. Panic flared in her eyes. "No, of course not. I would never." "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "I'm done with the lies. I found the lingerie, Cynthia, the stuff in the back of your drawer, the leather, the straps. You weren't wearing that for me. So who was it for?" She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently, the first crack in her new wall of lies. She was cornered. It was just for fun," she mumbled, looking at the floor. "Brooke and some of the others. They like to have their adventures." "And you just watched?" I pressed, taking a step closer. Her composure finally broke. The whole story came tumbling out, a torrent of ugly, filthy truth. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Sometimes. I went along." The air left my lungs. The bourbon in my glass might as well have been poison. "And Prague?" I demanded, my voice raw. "Who were you with?" Because it wasn't just the two guys from the band, was it? She started shaking her head, sobbing uncontrollably. No, not the band. Who, Cynthia? The roadies, she choked out. And then Brooke, she invited the local crew from the venue inside. They were all just there. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to grip the back of a chair to steady myself. The image was vile, a grotesque painting of depravity. She kept giving me more pills, Cynthia wailed, her words slurring through her tears. And she was laughing, shouting a word. What word? She looked up at me, her face a mask of utter shame and self-loathing. She was shouting next, in English for everyone to hear, while they all watched. The room spun. Next, the word was a physical blow, a brand, a final, terrible question surfaced. I had to ask it. I had to know the full depth of the betrayal. And how long, Cynthia? How long has this been going on, these adventures? She was broken now, all lies exhausted. She hugged her knees to her chest, making herself small, as if she could disappear. Her whispered answer was the shot that finally killed whatever was left of my love for her. Since we got engaged, that was it. That was the bottom. My proposal, the symbol of my ultimate commitment and love, had been her starting pistol. Her license to have one last series of flings before settling down. I felt a terrifying calm descend over me. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The rain was still coming down, a cold, indifferent curtain. "Get out," I said. My voice was empty. She looked up, her face streaked with tears and rain and mascara. "Logan, please, I said get out," I repeated, my voice as hard as steel. "We're done. I never want to see your face again." She stumbled to her feet, a broken, sobbing mess, and walked out into the rain. I watched her go, a pathetic figure disappearing into the dark, wet street. Then I closed the door, shutting out the storm, and leaned against it, the full weight of the truth finally crashing down on me. My home wasn't just built on a faulty foundation. The whole goddamn structure was rotten to the core. I threw myself into my work. In the clean, orderly world of architecture, there was no room for the chaos that had consumed my life. At the office, surrounded by blueprints and schematics, I was Logan Hayes, the rising star, the man shaping the city's skyline. The Hayes Tower was my gospel, a vertical sermon in steel and glass. Its foundation was deep, its core was strong, its logic was flawless. It was everything my life was not. But at night, the silence of my brownstone was a tomb. I'd sit in my office, the city lights glittering like cold diamonds outside my window, and try to focus on structural designs. But my mind would drift. I wouldn't see Cynthia's face from the video anymore. That image had been burned away by the raw, ugly truth of her confession. Instead, I saw her as I'd last seen her, a pathetic, drenched figure swallowed by the rainy dark. The image annoyed me. It felt like a weakness, a crack in the fortress of my rage. I tried to push it away, to bury it under deadlines and client meetings, but it kept coming back. It wasn't pity for her, I realized one night, staring at the glowing screen of my monitor. It wasn't love or forgiveness. It was a ghost, the ghost of my mother. My mom, Barbara, was a fighter. She raised me alone in a series of cramped, drafty apartments in Queens. She worked 2, sometimes 3, minimum-wage jobs, her hands always rough, her face perpetually tired. But she never broke. It wasn't until the week before cancer finally took her that she told me the whole story. A high school party. A boy she thought she liked. Too much cheap beer, her first time. Waking up the next morning confused, clothes in a heap on the floor, the shame. Then, weeks later, the terrifying realization. Her father, my grandfather, a man I've never met, was a pillar of his church, a man obsessed with appearances. When she finally confessed, he didn't see a scared teenage girl. He saw a stain on his reputation. He called her a slut, a whore. He threw her out of the house, shouting, "Go have your bastard in an alley." She was 17. That story was my origin. The reason for my hunger, my relentless drive to build something solid, something permanent. I was building a life my mother never had, a life where no one could ever be thrown out into the rain. And now, I had done it. I had become my grandfather. I had looked at a pregnant, desperate woman who had wronged me, and I had cast her out. The situations weren't the same. Cynthia was the architect of her own destruction. My mother a victim, but the child. The child was the same. An innocent, caught in the wreckage of the parents' mistakes. That child deserved better than an alley. It deserved better than a life cobbled together in shelters and charities. It deserved a foundation. The realization settled on me not with warmth, but with a heavy, cold weight. This wasn't about forgiving Cynthia. Forgiveness was a luxury I couldn't afford. This was about a debt I owed to the memory of my mother and to the lonely kid I used to be. I couldn't save my mother from her past, but I could prevent another child from living it. It was a complex, bitter pill to swallow, but I knew what I had to do. I had to build a shelter for the storm, even if it meant letting the storm back into my house. I found her staying at a cheap motel near the airport, the kind with stained carpets and the lingering smell of stale cigarettes. I called her from the parking lot. "Meet me at the diner across the street in 10 minutes, I said, and hung up before she could respond. The diner was a relic from another era, cracked red vinyl booths, a sticky film on the tabletops, the air thick with the smell of burnt coffee and grease. It was the perfect place for a transaction, utterly devoid of warmth or sentiment. She slid into the booth opposite me, looking even worse than she had the other night. She was pale, her eyes hollow. She clutched a paper cup of coffee like it was a lifeline. "Logan," she started, her voice a fragile whisper. "Thank you for coming." I cut her off. "This isn't a social call, Cynthia, and it's not a reconciliation. I want to be perfectly clear about that." I looked at her, my gaze as level and unyielding as a steel beam. "What you did is unforgivable. The person I was going to marry is gone. She doesn't exist anymore." Tears welled in her eyes, but she bit her lip and nodded, waiting. "But there's a child," I continued, my voice low and even, "and that child is not going to pay for your mistakes. So here's the deal." I laid it out like a legal contract. "You can have the guest room at the brownstone. You will live there until the baby is born, and you found a job and a place of your own. You will contribute to your own expenses from whatever money you have left. You will not interfere in my life. You will not enter my office or my bedroom. We are not a couple. We are not friends. We are two people living under the same roof for the sole purpose of providing a stable environment for an infant. These are the terms. Take them or leave them." She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, the tears now streaming freely down her cheeks. She was searching my face for something, a hint of affection, a glimmer of the man who once loved her. She found nothing. There was nothing there to find. "Okay," she finally whispered, the word choked with a sob. "Okay, Logan. Thank you." "Don't thank me," I said, my voice cold. I stood up, leaving a $10 bill on the table to cover her coffee. "This isn't for you." I walked out of the diner without looking back, the smell of burnt coffee clinging to my clothes. The deal was done. The guest house was no longer for friends or family. It was now a halfway house, a temporary shelter. I had made a choice driven by the ghosts of the past, and now I had to live with the consequences. I had a new roommate, a lodger who was carrying a burden that was about to become the new center of my world. The next 7 months were a masterclass in controlled avoidance. We moved around each other in the brownstone like two opposing magnets, a carefully maintained space always between us. I worked constantly, burying myself in the Hayes Tower project. Cynthia, growing larger and more uncomfortable by the day, spent most of her time in her room or at the library looking for jobs online. We rarely spoke. The silence was a language all its own, thick with everything we couldn't say. The night it happened, I was woken from a dead sleep by a soft knock on my bedroom door. "Logan?" Cynthia's voice was tight with pain. I think it's time." The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and the sterile antiseptic smell that always made my stomach clench. I filled out forms, my handwriting a tight, controlled script. I was there as part of the deal, the designated driver, the emergency contact, nothing more. But when they led me into the delivery room, the clinical detachment I'd so carefully constructed began to crumble. The room was a symphony of beeping machines and hushed professional voices. Cynthia was in the bed, her face pale and beaded with sweat, her body contorted in a wave of pain. In that moment, she wasn't the woman who had betrayed me. She was just a person, scared and in agony. The hours that followed were long and brutal. I stood in the corner, a silent observer, feeling utterly useless. Through it all, Cynthia didn't curse my name. She didn't scream in anger. With every contraction, through gritted teeth, she'd whisper the same two words over and over again, a mantra of her own making. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Then with a final, primal cry from Cynthia and a calm instruction from the doctor, everything changed. A new sound filled the room, a tiny, furious wail. The nurse, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, cleaned the baby, wrapped her in a soft white blanket, and then, to my surprise, turned to me. "Would you like to hold your daughter, Dad?" Before I could correct her, before I could explain the complex, broken situation, she placed the warm, squirming bundle in my arms, and the world tilted on its axis. I looked down. Her face was red and wrinkled, her eyes squeezed shut. A tuft of fine, dark hair stuck to her scalp. Her tiny fingers, impossibly perfect, curled and uncurled. She was real. She was here. All the anger, all the bitterness, all the cold, hard lines I had drawn around my heart, they didn't disappear, but they were suddenly irrelevant. In that moment, holding that 70.5-pound miracle, none of it mattered. The betrayal, the lies, the pain, it was all just noise. The only thing that was real was the tiny, fragile life in my arms. I felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it stole my breath. This little person knew nothing of Prague, or lies, or broken hearts. She was innocent. She was a clean slate, a new foundation. I looked over at Cynthia, who was watching me, her eyes exhausted but clear. For the first time in months, we made eye contact, and there was no anger or accusation between us. There was only the shared, silent awe of what had just happened. The nurse had called the baby my daughter, and in my heart I knew, with a terrifying and absolute certainty, that she was right. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know who her biological father was, but I knew she was mine. Bringing Chloe home was like introducing a new fundamental element into a volatile chemical equation. The entire atmosphere of the house changed. The cold silence was replaced by a new set of sounds. The soft coo of a sleeping baby, the frantic cries for a 3 a.m. feeding, the gentle melody of the mobile ID hung over her crib. Our awkward truce solidified into a strange, functional routine. Cynthia was the mother, her body the source of nourishment and comfort. I was the father, the one who took the night shifts. While Cynthia slept the exhausted sleep of a new mom, I would be the one to stumble into Chloe's room, change her diaper under the dim glow of a nightlight, and pace the floor with her tiny, warm body nestled against my chest until she drifted back to sleep. In those quiet, pre-dawn hours, the house felt like it was only ours, mine and Chloe's. I'd whisper to her, telling her about the buildings I was designing, about the city sleeping outside our window. Her tiny hand would grip my finger with surprising strength, and I would feel a love so profound, so unconditional, it was like learning a new color. It was a love that had nothing to do with romance or betrayal. It was foundational, structural. It was the load-bearing core of my new life. Cynthia and I remained orbits around the same sun. We were civil, polite. We discussed feeding schedules and diaper supplies with the detached efficiency of business partners. But the wall between us was as real and solid as the brick of the brownstone itself. We never touched. We rarely made eye contact for more than a second. I was Chloe's father. She was Chloe's mother, and the lodger in my guest room. The most painful moments were the quiet ones. I'd be on the living room floor, making Chloe giggle with a stupid face, and I'd look up to see Cynthia standing in the doorway, watching us. The look on her face was a complex tapestry of love for her daughter and a profound, aching loss for what she'd thrown away. She would see the effortless bond between me and the child she'd carried, and I knew it was a form of penance more severe than any angry words I could ever speak. She was a ghost in the home we were supposed to build together, forced to watch me build a new one with her daughter, right in front of her eyes. One afternoon, Sean came over to meet the baby. He held Chloe awkwardly, looking terrified and amazed at the same time. "She's small," he said, grinning. "She's perfect," I replied, my eyes not leaving her. Later, while Cynthia was in her room, Sean and I sat in the kitchen. He looked around at the baby paraphernalia that had taken over the space. "This is weird, man," he said, lowering his voice. "You, her, the baby, how are you doing this?" I looked toward the hallway, then back at my friend. "I'm not doing it for her, Sean. I'm doing it for Chloe." I paused, trying to find the right words. It's like, when a project has a catastrophic failure, you don't just walk away from the site, you secure it. You protect anything salvageable. Chloe, she's the part that's worth saving. The rest is just rubble. Sean nodded slowly, understanding. The life I'd planned was gone, demolished. But from the rubble, something new and unexpected was being built. And I was its architect, its sole protector. Chloe was my project now, and I would not let her fail. For nearly 2 years, life had settled into a predictable, if sterile, rhythm. Chloe was the sun, and Cynthia and I were planets in a fixed, silent orbit around her. Chloe had started to talk, her first word being a garbled version of "da" that made my heart crack wide open. She was walking, a clumsy, determined toddler who filled the quiet brownstone with the sound of her laughter. I had found a strange peace in the routine, in the fierce, all-consuming love I had for my daughter. I had begun to think this was it. This was my life now. Then the doorbell rang. It wasn't a friend. It was a process server, a tired-looking man in a cheap suit who handed me a thick manila envelope and asked me to sign for it. I closed the door, my hands suddenly cold. The envelope felt heavy, dense with malice. I tore it open. The words, printed in the cold, impersonal language of the law, jumped off the page. Cynthia Lewis versus Logan Hayes. A petition for sole legal and physical custody. A demand for child support so astronomical it would have been laughable if it weren't so venomous. But it was the accusations that knocked the wind out of me. The document painted me as a monster. It claimed I was emotionally unstable, a controlling and manipulative figure who had coercively isolated Cynthia from her child. It twisted my provision of a home into an act of imprisonment. It painted my focused love for Chloe as an attempt to alienate the child from her natural mother. I read it twice, then a third time, the words blurring. The cold, controlled anger I had packed away so carefully roared back to life, but this time it was different. It was the icy rage of a cornered animal whose young was being threatened. I knew she wasn't doing this alone. This had Zachary's fingerprints all over it. He had seen my name in the architectural journals, seen the Hayes Tower climbing higher into the sky week by week. He had waited, bided his time, and now he was making his move, using his daughter and his grandchild as leverage to get a piece of the success he felt I owed them. I picked up the phone and called Mark. "I just got served," I said, my voice tight. "I was wondering when they'd play their hand," Mark replied, his voice calm. He'd already heard from her lawyer. "It's a garbage suit, Logan, a money grab. She's calling me unstable, a danger to my own, to the child." I couldn't bring myself to say Chloe's name in the context of this filth. "Of course she is. That's the playbook," Mark said. "They're not trying to win in court. They're trying to scare you into a massive settlement. They think you'll pay anything to make this go away quietly and protect your reputation." I looked through the living room window. Chloe was asleep in her playpen, one tiny hand clutching a soft toy giraffe. My reputation? They had no idea what was really at stake. "Mark," I said, my voice dangerously low, "I will not settle. I will not give them 1 damn cent more than the law requires. You understand me? This is a war now. I want you to bury them." "Glad to hear it," Mark said, a hint of satisfaction in his tone. "Let's get to work." The lodger in my guest room was no longer a ghost. She was the enemy, and she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The Hayes Tower construction site was my sanctuary. Amidst the organized chaos, the roar of machinery, the shouts of the foreman, the skeletal grid of steel reaching for the sky, I felt a sense of control that was absent from the rest of my life. This was a world of physics and precise calculations. It was real. It was honest. I was on the 20th floor, reviewing a snag list with my site manager when I first met her. The wind whipped around us, carrying the scent of wet concrete and the metallic tang of cut steel. "The load-bearing wall on the west corridor isn't aligned with the latest MEP schematics, Logan. The HVAC ducting is going to be a nightmare." The voice was crisp, confident, and came from behind me. I turned. Standing there was a woman I hadn't seen before. She was tall, with intelligent dark eyes and a cascade of wavy brown hair pulled back in a practical but stylish knot. She was wearing a tailored black blazer over a simple white t-shirt, dark jeans, and a pair of scuffed but clearly expensive steel-toed work boots. She held a rolled-up set of blueprints in one hand. "You must be Claire Romano," I said, recognizing the name of the lead interior designer we'd hired. "I'm Logan Hayes." "I know who you are," she said with a small, wry smile. "Your name's on the building." She tapped her blueprints against her palm. "And your structural team seems to think we can just phase air ducts through solid concrete. I'm here to argue for the laws of physics." I was taken aback. She was direct, no-nonsense, and completely unintimidated. Most people who came to my site were. "Let me see," I said, taking the blueprints she offered. We spent the next 20 minutes huddled over the plans, the wind whipping at our clothes, our heads close together as we debated placement and feasibility. She was brilliant. She saw the space not just as lines on a page, but as a living, breathing entity. She pointed out a solution, a minor adjustment to a non-load-bearing wall that was so simple and elegant I couldn't believe my own team had missed it. "You're right," I admitted, a smile touching my lips for what felt like the first time in months. "That's damn good." "I have my moments," she said, her dark eyes sparkling. "Now that we've established I'm occasionally right, how about you buy me a coffee to celebrate our newfound respect for physics? We can discuss the atrocity you're planning for the lobby lighting." I laughed. A real laugh. It felt foreign, a muscle I hadn't used in a long time. The weight of the lawsuit, the cold tension at home for a moment, it all receded. In its place was just the shared energy of two people who love to build things. "Deal," I said, "but I'm not promising anything on the lighting." As we walked toward the noisy construction elevator, I felt something shift inside me. It was the first crack of light in a very long, very dark tunnel. That coffee meeting turned into a 3-hour conversation. We started with the lobby lighting and ended up talking about everything from Le Corbusier to the questionable quality of New York hot dogs. Claire was sharp, funny, and she listened with an intensity that made me feel like I was the only person in the crowded cafe. It was intoxicating. We started meeting regularly, always under the guise of project coordination. A week later, it was dinner at a quiet Italian place in the West Village. Over plates of pasta, the conversation turned more personal. "You seem preoccupied," she said gently, swirling wine in her glass. "Like you're designing a skyscraper with one hand and holding up a collapsing building with the other." I hadn't talked about my situation with anyone but Sean and Mark. But looking into Claire's clear, non-judgmental eyes, I found myself wanting to. So I told her. I didn't give her all the sordid details, but I gave her the shape of it. The betrayal, the canceled wedding, the child, the woman living in my house, the lawsuit. I laid out the broken blueprint of my life on the table between us. When I finished, I expected her to look at me with pity, or maybe even to politely excuse herself. Instead, she just nodded slowly. "That's a heavy load to carry," she said. She reached across the table and lightly touched the back of my hand. Her touch was warm, brief. "But you know, as well as I do, that sometimes the most beautiful buildings are the ones that have been retrofitted, the ones with history. Everyone has unfinished projects that need fixing, Logan. Yours is just a bit more complicated than most. Unfinished projects that need fixing." The phrase resonated deep within me. She wasn't seeing me as damaged goods. She was seeing me as an architect facing a complex challenge. She understood. Our dinners became a regular thing. They were my lifeline. In the middle of receiving threatening letters from Cynthia's lawyer and spending hours with Mark strategizing for a fight I never wanted, my time with Claire was a protected space. It was a space for laughter, for intellectual debate, for the slow, hesitant rebuilding of my own humanity. One night, after a particularly great dinner, we were walking through Washington Square Park. A jazz trio was playing near the fountain, their music a soulful melody against the city's hum. "You know," I said, stopping to listen, "I haven't felt this normal in a long time." "Maybe normal is overrated," Claire said, smiling up at me. "Maybe strong is better." The space between us suddenly felt charged. The jazz music, the soft glow of the park lamps, the energy of the city all around us, it all faded into the background. There was just her, looking at me with an expression of open, honest affection. I leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of desperation or loneliness. It was quiet, tentative, a question. And when she kissed me back, it was the answer. It felt like coming home to a place I didn't even know I'd been building. The wall I had built around my heart didn't crumble, but for the first time, it felt like someone had just found the door. The relationship with Claire was a secret garden in the middle of a war zone. The closer the court date loomed, the more vicious the attacks from Cynthia's legal team became. They filed motions demanding access to my company's financials, deposing my friends, trying to find any crack in my facade they could exploit. Zachary was funding a siege, hoping to starve me out. My brownstone became my command center. Chloe would be asleep in her room, her breathing a soft, steady rhythm that was the only peaceful sound in the house, while I sat at the dining room table surrounded by stacks of legal documents. I gathered evidence, copies of the texts Cynthia had sent me, bank statements showing my sole financial support, a sworn affidavit from Sean about the confrontation in Soho. It felt sordid, like picking through the ashes of a fire to prove who started it. Cynthia and I were now communicating exclusively through our lawyers. She remained in the guest room, a silent, hostile presence on the other side of the house. You'd see her sometimes, a fleeting glimpse in the hallway, and her eyes held a new expression. Not shame, but a hard, resentful glare. The victim narrative she'd tried to sell me had curdled into a genuine belief that she was the one who had been wronged. One evening I was on the phone with Mark, going over our strategy for the hearing. They're going to try to paint you as a cold, calculating workaholic who wants to steal a baby from its loving mother, Mark said, his voice grim. We need to counter that with evidence of your Hansen care since day one. Photos, videos, testimony from the pediatrician. I've got it all, Mark. Good. Now there's one more thing. It's a formality, but the court will want it on file to establish the chain of custody and the undisputed maternity. I need you to get me an official, certified copy of Chloe's birth certificate from the city. A birth certificate? Why? Like I said, formality. It just locks in that Cynthia is the legal mother of record. It's one less thing for them to argue about. Just a box to check. Can you handle that tomorrow? Yeah, sure, I said, making a note on a legal pad. No problem. It seemed like such a small, insignificant piece of paper in a mountain of documents. A procedural hoop to jump through. I had no idea that this simple formality, this routine piece of bureaucracy, was not just another brick in my defense. It was the bomb that was about to blow their entire case to pieces. I hung up the phone and walked to the doorway of Chloe's room. She was asleep, her little chest rising and falling, her stuffed giraffe tucked under her arm. I watched her for a long time, the fierce, protective love I felt for her a physical ache in my chest. They could attack my character, they could lie about my motives, they could try to take my money. But they were not going to take her. I would burn the world down first. The battle was coming, and I was ready. The morning I went to the city's Department of Health to pick up the birth certificate was gray and overcast, the sky the color of dirty dishwater. It felt appropriate. I stood in a long, slow-moving line surrounded by fresh-faced new parents glowing with happiness and harried-looking people retrieving documents for passports. It was a bureaucratic purgatory, and I was just another soul waiting for a piece of paper. When my number was finally called, I paid the fee, and a clerk handed me a certified copy of the document in a crisp envelope. It felt anticlimactic. I didn't even look at it. I just slid it into my briefcase, another piece of ammunition for a war I was dreading. Back at the office, I scanned it and emailed the file to Mark with a one-line message. As requested. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings and impossible deadlines. I was trying to lose myself in work, but the impending court battle was a low-grade fever, a constant hum of anxiety beneath the surface. My phone rang at 6 p.m. It was Mark. "Logan," he said, and his voice sounded strange, not his usual sharp, confident tone. He sounded baffled. "Are you sitting down?" "I'm at my desk," I said, my stomach tightening. "What's wrong? Did they file another motion?" "No, Logan, about this birth certificate." He paused. "I think you sent me the wrong document." "What?" That's impossible, Mark. I just picked it up this morning. It's a certified copy. Then I don't understand what I'm looking at, he said, and I could hear him rustling papers. Their entire case, the paternity claim, the child support demands it's all predicated on you not being the legal father. They're trying to establish paternity to get support. And, I prompted, my patience wearing thin. And, he said slowly, his voice full of disbelief, according to this official, city-issued, legally binding document, you already are. The world stopped. The hum of the city outside my window, the ticking of the clock on my wall, the very air in my lungs, it all just ceased. What did you say? I'm reading it right here, Logan, Mark said, his voice rising with excitement. Child's name, Chloe Ann Lewis. Mother's name, Cynthia Marie Lewis. Father's name, Logan Michael Hayes. Father, Logan Michael Hayes. The words didn't compute. They were a foreign language. It was a mistake. A clerical error. No, I whispered. No, that can't be right. I'm not. I wasn't there for that. It gets better, Mark continued, practically buzzing now. It has your signature on it, on the acknowledgement of paternity line. Logan, this isn't just a claim. It's a legal fact. You've been her legal father since the day she was born. A memory, foggy and distant, surfaced from the chaos of Chloe's birth. The hospital, the exhaustion, a nurse with a clipboard smiling tiredly. Just need the father to sign here as a witness, please. I had been so overwhelmed, so focused on the tiny baby in the bassinet, I'd just scribbled my name where she'd pointed, desperate to get back to Chloe. I thought I was signing as a witness to the birth. I wasn't. Cynthia. In the midst of her pain and exhaustion, in the immediate aftermath of everything, she had made a choice. She hadn't put Father Unknown. She had put my name. Mark was laughing on the other end of the phone now, a triumphant, incredulous laugh. Logan, do you understand what this means? She can't sue you to establish paternity because you are already the legal father. Her entire case, it's built on a foundation of sand. It's over. We've won. I dropped the phone into its cradle. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, my heart hammering against my ribs, not with anxiety, but with a wild, incredulous relief. The weapon Cynthia had spent months and her father's fortune building, the legal battering ram she was about to smash against my life, had just disintegrated in her hands. She had armed me with my own shield 2 years ago in a sterile hospital room, and I never even knew I was holding it. The aftermath was swift and brutal. It was like a controlled demolition. Once the key supports were gone, the entire corrupt structure came crashing down. Mark called me a week later. I was at home on the floor, building a tower of blocks with Chloe. It's done, he said. There was a grim satisfaction in his voice. They withdrew the entire petition this morning. Just like that? I asked, watching Chloe clap her hands as our tower wobbled. Just like that. Her lawyer saw the birth certificate and knew they were dead in the water. Worse, he knew they were on the hook for malicious prosecution and potential perjury charges. He dropped her as a client so fast it probably gave her whiplash. According to Mark, the fallout was catastrophic for the Lewis family. Zachary, furious at being humiliated and having wasted a fortune on a losing case built on a lie, had thrown Cynthia out for good. The scandal of the lawsuit, combined with some of his own shady business dealings coming to light, had spooked his partners. His company was in turmoil. He had cut Cynthia off completely, financially, and personally. Brooke and the rest of the Adventure Club had long since scattered, disappearing from Cynthia's life the moment the video had tarnished their own reputations. She was alone, utterly and completely. I felt a strange emptiness at the news. I'd expected to feel triumphant, vindicated, but there was no joy in this victory. It was just a quiet, sad finality. Cynthia had systematically burned every bridge in her life to her friends, to her family, and finally, to me. Now she was on an island of her own making, and the ashes of those bridges were all she had left. I never saw her again. I heard, months later through a third-hand source, that she had moved to a small town somewhere in the Midwest, working a retail job. She had lost everything. Her name, her status, her family, and her daughter. It was a bitter, tragic end, a fate she had written for herself, line by painful line. The quiet that settled over the house in the weeks that followed was different. It wasn't the tense, heavy silence of before. It was a peaceful silence, the kind that comes after a long storm has passed. One Friday night, Claire came over for dinner. It was the first time she'd been to the house since the lawsuit had been dropped. The legal documents were gone from the dining room table, replaced by a vase of fresh flowers. The air smelled of roasted chicken and garlic. Chloe, now old enough to be a tiny, chaotic helper, was assisting Claire in the kitchen. I stood in the doorway watching them. Claire was laughing, her face smudged with a bit of flour. Chloe was giggling, stirring a bowl with intense concentration. The scene was so simple, so wonderfully normal, it brought a lump to my throat. This was the life I had almost lost. Later, after Chloe was asleep, Claire and I sat on the couch with glasses of wine. The lights were low, and the city hummed softly outside. I told her everything about the birth certificate, about the nurse and my signature, about Cynthia's final, inexplicable act. She listened patiently, her expression thoughtful. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. She reached out, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass. "Maybe," she said softly, "in that one moment, after everything, she did the one honest thing she had left to do. Maybe she knew Chloe deserved a father, and she knew you were the only one who would ever truly be it." I had never thought of it that way. I had seen it as a mistake, a legal loophole. Claire saw it as a moment of broken, complicated humanity. She looked around the room, at the soft lighting, at the scattered toys on the rug. Then she looked at me. A warm, genuine smile spread across her face. "You know," she said, her eyes sparkling, "for a guy whose life was almost demolished, you've done some impressive rebuilding." She leaned over and kissed me, a soft, lingering kiss full of promise. "The foundation looks pretty solid, architect." I pulled her closer, my heart feeling fuller and more stable than it had in years. She was right. The ground beneath my feet was finally firm. 6 years later, the wind at the top of the Hayes Tower is different. It's cleaner, sharper. From the observation deck on the 50th floor, the city of New York spreads out below like a vast, intricate blueprint. The cars are tiny specks, the streets are precise lines, and the buildings I once dreamed of are now my peers, their spires glinting in the afternoon sun. "Daddy, can I see?" I lift Chloe into my arms. At 8 years old, she is a whirlwind of questions and laughter, with my determination and Claire's sparkling, intelligent eyes. "Look," I say, pointing. "From here you can see all the way to the park where we fly kites." "And our house?" she asks. "Our house too," I say. Claire comes to stand beside us, sliding her arm around my waist. We've been married for 3 years, and our own little boy, Sam, is at home with a sitter. Our life is a beautiful, chaotic, wonderfully ordinary thing. She rests her head on my shoulder, and we watch our daughter point out landmarks. Sometimes I think back to that time, the betrayal, the rage, the crushing weight of it all. It feels like another lifetime, a story about someone else. The pain has faded, leaving behind not a scar, but a lesson in structural integrity. I once thought that happiness was about having a perfect plan and executing it flawlessly. I was wrong. Life isn't a blueprint. It's a construction site. It's messy, it's unpredictable, and sometimes the foundation you pour turns out to be rotten. The betrayal didn't break me. It forced a demolition. It forced me to tear down the hollow, pretty facade I had mistaken for a home and to start over. It taught me that real strength isn't about avoiding the storm. It's about what you build from the rubble when the storm has passed. I look at Claire, my partner, my best friend. I look at Chloe, my smart, incredible daughter, the unexpected cornerstone of my world. This view, this life, this family. This is the tower I was always meant to build, and its foundation is solid. It's built not on a flawless plan, but on honesty, on forgiveness, and on a love that is real, tested, and true. And from up here, the future looks limitless.